All right, let's put a pin on VC investments in media, which are historically risky, and talk about risk in general for VCs. You know, a question that we had while prepping for this week's show was, where are we right now? What does the venture capital market actually feel like? Is this kind of a risk on moment? Is it a bit risk off? There's been a lot of change in the last couple of weeks, it feels, with the election, the resurgence of COVID-19 around the world, possible lockdowns, changes in public markets. It's been dynamic, I want to say. So I want to turn to both of you in turn and just kind of get your general temperature on the part of the VC world you focus on is doing and how active it is. And Natasha, I'm curious what you think about the early stage space.
Yeah, I think a line I keep hearing from founders and investors alike is, 90% of the world is going to go back to normal, and we're going to go for the 10% that is staying in this new normal, in this virtual work, ed tech focused, fintech focused world. And so I think it's kind of a cop-out answer, but it does feel a little bit more realistic than we saw maybe in June or July of like the future is full remote work, Microsoft announcing forever closed offices, Twitter saying it's, forever going to be this way. I feel like now people are kind of being like, oh, I mean, things are going to reopen and it's just going to be a more flexible format. So it's to answer the risk question, I think people are starting to prepare to be a little more grounded in their risk tolerance.
Is that because their views of like growth for some of these startups is beginning to come down a little bit as they can kind of see the return to the old normal and therefore less focus on, ed tech solutions and software and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, I think we saw with, the reaction to the Pfizer news on Monday, even though the stock markets are volatile and we can only weigh them so much, I think that was still a moment where you see every ed tech stock down in some way and you realize that you can't just tout that this is how people are going to learn for the rest of their lives. I think like a lot of VCs also have been telling me that the conservative times should still be your MO at the moment, because you should not be going back to 2019 spending just yet. Maybe if you're Brex, you can, but not any other startup.
Wow. Okay, that's actually more bearish than I expected to hear from you on the early stage side. Danny, you talked to VCs who are a little bit later on in the growthy side of things. What's the heat check over there?
I help informally a lot of founders fundraise. And, when it was like, I would call it the post-COVID, not immediately post-COVID, where everyone was doubling down their own portfolios and trying to clean up their own previous investments, from like May through August, maybe even to September, it was extremely strong for fundraising. Fundraises happened so quickly. Everyone was trying to make bets. And it was basically like, hey, there's going to be like 8 or 9 categories, like remote work, living outside the suburbs, redoing home mortgages and a bunch of fintech products, remote work in companies, what kind of collaboration tools. And like everyone got their bets out really fast in all these spaces. Now in the last couple of weeks, when I talk to founders, the fundraisers are just slower. I think a lot of folks are like, burnt through a lot of capital this summer, very quickly making investment decisions. We've talked on the show before about how, partner meetings were being held at 10 p.m. the night of to try to make investment deals as quickly as possible. And I think a lot of folks now are doing this kind of end of year reassessment of like, wow, we just made a bunch of deals and bets this year. We've moved really, really fast. We're going to talk about Hop in a bit, but like some companies have gone from seed round to a $2 billion, unicorn valuation in like 6 months. And like, we need to like just wait for the shakedown to take place, right? To see what actually is going to stick. And so my sense is things have gotten slower, certainly at the seed and A. The growth is still what it is as always, right? There's a ton of capital. If you have the numbers, those checks come in rapid fire. If you don't have the numbers, I think it's harder today than it was before. I think there was much more flexibility. I think we've seen, not just in the last 2 weeks, but in the last couple, 2 months, some of the valuations have come down to earth. People are realizing that the whole world is not going to move to remote permanently, particularly if a vaccine is going to come, supposedly with Pfizer, we're going to have millions of doses of vaccine by the end of the year. That's 6 weeks from now. If we are actually back to normal by June, let's pray. But if we are coming back to normal in June, like that actually is not enough time for culture to actually have changed all that significantly. We're all going to go back to schools, in buildings. We're all going to get on school buses. We're all going to commute on the subway back to our offices in Midtown. Like nothing really is going to change. And the exception, I think, is actually, ironically, events.
Yeah, which we'll get to in just a second. Natasha, one thing that I've been keeping tabs on in the risk on side of the early stage market has been rolling funds, because to me, they're kind of like almost like they're the SPAC of VC. They're this weird kind of thing that, people are using to kind of hack their way into the system. I'm curious if you're still getting a lot of emails about rolling funds that are being, sorry for this, rolled out lately.
I haven't heard too many like pitches, which I think is good because it's not necessarily always newsworthy for a rolling fund to start because it requires such a low lift. I think the growing conversation, and Danny wrote a piece on Spearhead that he should chime in on too, is that so many people are now going from, $1 to $5 million and can now invest. And so the question of 2021 and onward is like, how do you get from 5 to 50 million? And so we're just going to see pre-seed feel really exciting. And like, there's so much access, but unfortunately it's going to completely dry up once someone raises like, their pre-seed and seed and whatever other round, because there's just a ton of new entrants, but not across all stages.